Korean history begins with rich mythology and early tribal states. According to Korean legend, the first Korean kingdom, Gojoseon, was founded in 2333 BCE by the mythical King Dangun, said to be the son of a heavenly prince and a bear woman. While this is legend, it highlights a deep-rooted sense of ethnic identity among Koreans that stretches back into prehistory. Archaeologically, by the first millennium BCE, a kingdom had formed in northern Korea along the Taedong River. Gojoseon grew into a federation of tribes and is credited with bringing early advancements, like bronze tools and weapons, to the Korean peninsula. It was later overtaken by Chinese Han Empire forces in 108 BCE, but its legacy lived on. In fact, modern North and South Korea still celebrate National Foundation Day, commemorating Dangun's founding of the nation. Following the fall of Gojoseon, the peninsula splintered into warring states. Over the next centuries, smaller states coalesced into what became known as the Three Kingdoms of Korea. By the 1st century BCE, three rival kingdoms emerged. Goguryeo in the north, traditionally 37 BC, Baekje in the southwest, 18 BC, and Silla in the southeast, 57 BC. These kingdoms, along with a smaller Gaia confederation, developed distinct cultures but shared language and beliefs. Goguryeo grew into a powerful state spanning much of Manchuria and northern Korea. Baekje became a maritime power with close cultural exchange with Japan, and Silla eventually grew in power on the southeastern plains. During this era, Buddhism was introduced from China in the 4th century CE and was enthusiastically adopted, especially by Goguryeo and Baekje, bringing art, architecture, and literacy in Chinese characters. The Three Kingdoms period, 57 BCE, 668 CE, was an age of both warfare and cultural blossoming, as each kingdom built palaces, painted exquisite murals and tombs, and developed distinctive handicrafts like celadon pottery and gold jewelry. It is a defining era in Korean identity, with each kingdom's pride and accomplishments still celebrated in Korean folklore and history. Royal burial mounds of the Silla Kingdom in Gyeongju, South Korea. Silla unified most of the Korean peninsula in the 7th century CE. In the 7th century, the long era of three kingdoms rivalry culminated in unification. The kingdom of Silla allied with China's Tang dynasty to decisively defeat Baekje in 660 CE and Goguryeo by 668 CE. Silla's triumph ushered in the unified Silla period, 668 to 935 CE, the first time the Korean peninsula was mostly united under a native Korean state, aside from some northern territories where a successor state called Balhae arose. This unification under indigenous leadership was a pivotal moment. For the first time, Korea could develop as a relatively cohesive nation. Silla expelled the Tang forces by 676 CE to secure full autonomy, then presided over a golden age of culture in the 8th and 9th centuries. During unified Silla, Buddhism flourished as the state religion. Magnificent temples and stone pagodas were built, including the Bulguksa Temple and Sukagurung Grotto, now UNESCO heritage sites. Confucian principles also took root in governance and education through national Confucian academies. Silla's capital of Gyeongju became a cosmopolitan center of East Asia, renowned for its art and science. The unified Silla dynasty enjoyed several centuries of stability, during which the Korean people began to share more of a common cultural and linguistic identity. Many features of Korean culture that endure today, from the Korean language, spoken in a unified realm, to culinary and clothing styles, began to homogenize in this period. Silla artisans produced exquisite works such as gold crowns, Buddhist sculptures, and the celestial globe, an early star map globe. However, by the 9th century, the kingdom weakened due to internal strife, aristocratic rebellions, and peasant uprisings. In 935 CE, the last Silla king bowed to a new rising power, bringing the Silla era to an end. The vacuum left by Silla's decline was filled by Goryeo, also spelled Koryo. a dynasty founded in 918 CE by King Taejo, Wangjian. Goryeo reunified the peninsula and part of Manchuria, and its rule lasted until 1392. Notably, the English name Korea is derived from Goryeo. This period was formative in shaping a distinctly Korean civilization. Goryeo embraced Buddhism as the state religion and achieved remarkable cultural feats. One proud achievement was the creation of the Tripitaka Koreana, a complete Buddhist canon carved onto over 80,000 wooden blocks in the 13th century, a testament to the kingdom's piety and technical skill. Goryeo craftsmen were also famed for inventing movable metal-type printing in the 13th century, predating Gutenberg, and for their masterful celadon pottery, coveted across East Asia. Politically, Goryeo built a centralized monarchy and a civil service system influenced by Chinese Confucian models, while maintaining Korean traditions. It codified laws and operated official universities. The kingdom faced severe external threats. Between 1231 and 1270, Goryeo resisted the Mongol invasions. After decades of fierce fighting, Goryeo's kings eventually conceded and entered into a forced alliance with the Mongol-led Yuan dynasty, even intermarrying with Mongol princesses. This vassalage lasted roughly a century, during which Mongol influence penetrated court life. Despite these hardships, Goryeo's identity remained intact. It outlasted the Mongols, and as Yuan power waned, Goryeo restored its full sovereignty. By the late 14th century, corruption and power struggles at court and the lingering burden of wars weakened Goryeo. In 1392, a general named Isong Jawai led a coup, overthrowing Goryeo and establishing a new dynasty, Joseon, ending 474 years of Goryeo rule. Gyeongbokgung Palace, built 1395, in Seoul was the main royal palace of the Joseon dynasty. The Joseon dynasty, 1392 to 1897, was one of Korea's longest ruling dynasties, presiding over 500 years of relative stability. Founded by King Taejo, Isong Jawai, Joseon established its capital in Hanyang, today's Seoul, and heralded a deep transformation of Korean society. The dynasty officially adopted Neo-Confucianism as state ideology, displacing Buddhism from political prominence. Confucian ethics, emphasizing filial piety, scholarship, and social harmony, became the guiding principles of government, education, and family life. The civil service examination system, based on Confucian classics, was expanded to recruit officials on merit, at least among the Yangban aristocracy. As Neo-Confucianism took root, Buddhism was actively suppressed. Many Buddhist temples saw their landholdings confiscated and monks were discriminated against. This policy, often summarized as respect Confucianism, repress Buddhism, aimed to remove Buddhist political influence. Despite this, Buddhism continued as a private faith for many commoners, and shamanistic folk beliefs also quietly persisted. Joseon is celebrated as a golden age of pre-modern Korean culture and innovation. A hallmark achievement was the creation of the Korean alphabet Hangul in 1443 to 1444 by King Sejong the Great. Until then, Koreans had written using adapted Chinese characters, Hanja, which were cumbersome for writing Korean. Sejong, concerned that common people could not read or write, personally led the development of a simple phonetic alphabet. Hangul was promulgated in 1446 with the publication of Hunminjeongeum, and it revolutionized literacy by making reading and writing accessible to all classes. Today, Hangul is considered one of the most scientific writing systems in the world and remains Korea's proudest cultural invention. Under Sejong and other enlightened monarchs, Joseon saw advances in science, calendars, astronomical clocks, rain gauges, medicine, literature, and agriculture. Culturally, Joseon refined the culinary and sartorial traditions recognizable in Korea today. Kimchi, the fermented vegetable dish, became a staple of the Korean diet centuries ago and remains so to this day. Hanbok, the colorful traditional clothing, developed in its classic form during Joseon. The dynasty also left an enduring architectural legacy. Elegant palaces like Gyeongbokgung, pictured in Cheongdeokgung, and the cityscape of Seoul with its city gates and streets aligning with Confucian geomancy. Much of modern Korean etiquette, social norms, and language, including dialect divisions, originates from the Joseon era. In fact, everyday Korean language today is directly descended from the Seoul dialect of late Joseon, and many cultural attitudes, respect for elders, importance of education, are deeply Confucian, a Joseon legacy. Joseon was not without turbulence. It faced foreign invasions that tested its resilience, notably the Japanese invasions of 1592 to 1598, the Imjin War, repelled with the help of Ming China and the famous Admiral Yi Sun-sin, and the Manchu invasions of 1627 and 1636, which forced Joseon into tributary relations with the Qing dynasty. Afterwards, the dynasty adopted an isolationist stance to avoid further entanglement in regional conflicts, earning the nickname Hermit Kingdom in the West. The 18th century saw a cultural renaissance, the late Joseon period, with flourishing scholarship, Silhak practical learning movement, and arts, but also social stagnation and growing corruption in the bureaucracy. By the 19th century, internal unrest and foreign pressures, as Western powers knocked on Asia's doors, set the stage for the end of Joseon. In 1897, the king proclaimed the Korean Empire in a last-ditch effort to assert full sovereignty, but this was short-lived. The dawn of the 20th century brought a much greater upheaval. In the early 20th century, Korea fell victim to imperial ambitions. After the Russo-Japanese War, Japan tightened its grip on Korea, and in 1910 the Japanese Empire annexed Korea, making a colony. This was a traumatic period for the Korean people. Japan imposed a harsh colonial regime aimed at eradicating Korean identity. The Korean royal family was dethroned, Korean language schools were suppressed in favor of Japanese language education, and Koreans were even pressured, and later forced, to change their names to Japanese. Korea's resources were exploited to fuel Japan's industrialization and war machine. By the 1930s, Japan had built some industries and infrastructure in Korea, such as railroads and factories, but this development primarily served Japanese interests. Koreans had limited rights and faced discrimination in their own land. Dissent was brutally crushed by the colonial police. Despite oppression, Korean nationalism only grew stronger underground. Activists led a famous peaceful protest on March 1st, 1919, the March 1st movement, where demonstrations for independence spread nationwide. Though it was violently suppressed, it galvanized international attention and Korean unity. An exiled Korean provisional government was established in Shanghai, and resistance fighters, such as guerrillas in Manchuria, kept the spirit of independence alive. During World War II, many Koreans were conscripted for forced labor, and Korean women tragically were coerced as comfort women for the Japanese military, issues that remain sensitive to this day. By the war's end, living conditions in Korea had deteriorated severely. The country was drained of resources and food, and people were impoverished. In fact, by the end of the Pacific War, Korea was one of the poorest regions in the world due to Japan's exploitation of the peninsula. In August 1945, Japan's defeat in World War II finally liberated Korea, ending 35 years of colonial rule. However, this liberation was immediately followed by division, as Soviet and American forces accepted Japan's surrender in the north and south of Korea respectively. The country was suddenly split at the 38th parallel. The joyous moment of independence thus turned bittersweet, as two separate occupation zones emerged. With Japan gone, Koreans hoped to regain their nationhood. Instead, the emerging Cold War tensions led to the division of Korea into two states. In 1948, two separate governments were established: North Korea, Democratic People's Republic of Korea, in the Soviet-occupied North under Kim Il-sung, and South Korea, Republic of Korea, in the U.S.-occupied South under Syngman Rhee. Each claimed to be the sole legitimate government for all of Korea. The peninsula, which had been a single political entity for centuries, was now split by ideology and foreign influence. Communist in the north and anti-communist in the south. Tensions erupted into open conflict in 1950 when North Korean forces, aiming to reunify the country under communism, invaded the South on June 25th. This triggered the Korean War, 1950 to 1953, a brutal conflict that drew in major powers. The United States and United Nations allies rushed to defend South Korea, while China and the Soviet Union in support roles came to North Korea's aid. The war seesawed with massive offensives. North Korea captured Seoul in days. UN forces landed at Incheon and nearly reached the Chinese border. Then Chinese intervention pushed the UN back, resulting in a bloody stalemate around the original dividing line. After 3 years of fighting, an armistice was signed on July 27, 1953, essentially restoring the border near the 38th parallel and creating the demilitarized zone, DMZ, that still divides North and South. No formal peace treaty was ever signed, meaning the war technically never ended. The Korean War's toll was horrific. It caused over 1 million military deaths and 2 to 3 million civilian deaths, and it left virtually all major cities in Korea in ruins. Seoul changed hands 4 times and was largely destroyed. Pyongyang and many northern cities were leveled by U.S. bombing. The conflict also deepened the antagonism between North and South, cementing the division that persists today. In South Korea, the war experience, invasion, devastation, and eventual survival shaped a generation. Millions of families were separated by the partition, a painful legacy that endures. The armistice created a tense ceasefire, and the DMZ remains one of the most heavily fortified borders in the world. South Korea emerged from a war in 1953 devastated economically and socially, an agrarian country in rubble, with millions of refugees and orphans. Yet, this darkest hour set the stage for an extraordinary national revival in the decades to come. South Korea in the 1950s faced the Herculean task of rebuilding a nation from ashes. Syngman Rhee, the anti-communist independence activist who became the first president, led the new country from 1948 through the war years until 1960. His administration was plagued by corruption and authoritarian tendencies. Rhee cracked down on political opponents and amended the constitution to prolong his rule. However, his government did implement land reforms, redistributing land owned by Japanese colonials to Korean farmers, and laid the groundwork for education and infrastructure with American aid. The survival of South Korea through the war owed much to massive U.S. economic and military assistance, which continued afterward. Still, by the late 1950s, South Korea's economy was in dire straits. It relied heavily on foreign aid and had little industry. Discontent with Rhee's rule exploded in student-led protests in April 1960 after a disputed election, toppling Rhee in what's known as the April 19th Revolution. A short-lived democratic government, the Second Republic, followed, but instability persisted. In May 1961, General Park Chung-hee seized power in a military coup, marking the start of several decades of military-backed authoritarian rule. Park became president in 1963 and ruled until 1979, and his era profoundly transformed South Korea. Although his regime was repressive, dissent was curtailed, and the press censored, Park prioritized economic development above all else. In the 1960s, South Korea was still one of the least developed countries. Park famously rallied the populace to work and save, aiming to achieve a miracle on the Han River, inspired by West Germany's Miracle on the Rhine. His government introduced ambitious 5-year economic plans focused on industrialization, export growth, and infrastructure building. Villages were modernized through the Simal Undong New Village movement. Though living under martial law and a pervasive security apparatus, South Koreans began to see improvements in income, health, and education by the late 1960s. Park's developmental state worked closely with emerging chaebol, family-run conglomerates like Samsung, Hyundai, LG, to spearhead industrial projects, from textiles and electronics to shipbuilding and steel. The results were dramatic. South Korea's economy grew at an average of nearly 10% per year in the 1960s and 70s. The nation rapidly built highways, factories, and modern cities. In the space of a generation, South Korea went from war-torn poverty to an export powerhouse. However, the human costs were significant. Labor conditions were harsh, political freedom limited, and opponents of the regime were imprisoned or worse. Park Chung-hee himself entrenched his power by declaring a Yushin, revitalizing, constitution in 1972, effectively making himself president for life. This provoked increasing dissent from students, intellectuals, and even religious leaders who called for democratization. Park's assassination in 1979 led to a brief chaos and another army general, Chun Do-hwan, seizing control in 1980. Chun's rule, 1980 to 1988, continued authoritarian practices. Notably, protests in the city of Gwangju in May 1980 were brutally suppressed by the military, an incident known as the Gwangju Uprising. It left hundreds of citizens dead, but became a symbol of the pro-democracy struggle. Through the 1980s, pressure for democratic reform only grew. Ordinary citizens, students, and even parts of the middle class, empowered by economic prosperity, demanded greater political freedom. South Korea's astonishing economic rise from the 1960s to 1980s is often called the miracle on the Han River. During this period of rapid industrialization, South Korea transformed from one of the poorest agrarian nations into a highly developed country with a major industrial economy. In the early 1950s, South Korea's annual per capita income was a mere $67, comparable to the poorest countries in the world. By the 21st century, that figure had surged to tens of thousands of dollars. In 1965, for example, South Korea's GDP per capita was even lower than that of Ghana. Yet within a few decades, South Korea climbed to become the world's 12th largest economy. This growth was export-driven. South Korea built a strong manufacturing base, producing goods from steel and ships to cars, semiconductors, and consumer electronics, which were sold worldwide. South Koreans benefited from rising living standards, better education, and longer life expectancy. Child mortality plummeted and life expectancy rose dramatically as the country developed. Several factors powered this miracle. First, an ethos of hard work and education was promoted nationwide. Citizens were often reminded that only diligence and hurry, effort could secure prosperity. Second, substantial aid and loans, particularly from the United States, and later reparations from Japan after a 1965 normalization treaty, provided critical capital and technology in the early years. The government directed these funds into strategic industries. Third, the state's close partnership with corporate conglomerates, the chaebol, helped create globally competitive companies. For example, Samsung, LG, Hyundai, which today are household names. These companies led the charge in technological advancement and export expansion. By 1988, South Korea was confident enough to host the Summer Olympics in Seoul, showcasing its rebuilt capital and announcing its arrival on the world stage. In 2010, South Korea joined the G20 major economies, a symbolic capstone to its development, and in 1996, it had already joined the OECD, the Club of Advanced Economies. Of course, the rapid growth was not without challenges. The rush to industrialize caused environmental problems, pollution, deforestation, and a widening gap between the wealth of big businesses and the average worker. Labor unrest grew in the late 1980s as workers demanded better wages and rights commensurate with the nation's new wealth. South Korea also faced shocks like the 1997 Asian financial crisis, which it overcame with painful reforms and an IMF bailout. Yet, the overall trajectory remained upward. By the turn of the millennium, South Korea had evolved into a fully modern economy, known for cutting-edge technology. It became a global leader in broadband internet and mobile phone adoption, and high-quality industrial products, while also moving into services and cultural exports. The Miracle on the Han became a model studied by other developing countries, demonstrating how a nation with few natural resources turned itself into an economic powerhouse through human capital and strategic governance. Even as South Korea grew richer in the 1970s and 80s, its people yearned for democratic freedoms. The turning point came in 1987. That June, a broad-based movement of students, office workers, religious leaders, and ordinary citizens held massive demonstrations known as the June Democratic Struggle. Millions took to the streets in cities across the country, galvanized by public outrage over authoritarian abuses, including the torture death of a student activist. The protesters' demands were clear: an end to dictatorship and the introduction of free, direct presidential elections. Under intense public pressure, and with the world watching since Seoul was slated to host the 1988 Olympics, the ruling generals conceded. On June 29, 1987, President Chun's hand-picked successor, Roh Tae-woo, announced the government would accede to the key demands: democratic reforms and direct presidential elections. This marked South Korea's transition to the Sixth Republic, its current democratic republic. In late 1987, South Koreans enjoyed their first truly competitive presidential election. Though Roh Tae-woo, a ruling party figure, won that election, the country now had a legal framework for democracy, a new constitution that guaranteed civil liberties and regular elections. The press gained greater freedom, and opposition leaders who had been jailed or exiled, like Kim Dae-jung and Kim Young-sam, could openly participate in politics. By the early 1990s, the military had retreated to the barracks, and civilian politicians took the helm. In 1992, Kim Young-sam became the first civilian president in over 30 years. He launched reforms to stamp out remnants of military influence and corruption. In 1997, opposition leader Kim Dae-jung, once a dissident who narrowly escaped assassination, was elected president, marking the first peaceful transfer of power between rival parties in Korean history. Since democratization, South Korea has developed a vibrant, if sometimes tumultuous, multi-party political system. It has seen liberal and conservative administrations alternate and has witnessed high-profile impeachments. Most recently, President Park Geun-hye's impeachment in 2017 over a corruption scandal. A hallmark of South Korean democracy is its engaged civil society and free press, which often hold leaders accountable. Indeed, despite setbacks, democracy has deepened. Today, South Korea routinely scores high on indices of political freedom in Asia. Crucially, democratization also allowed South Korea to address historical wounds. For example, uncovering the truth of incidents like the Gwangju massacre and rehabilitating victims of past regimes. The rule of law was strengthened, and the economy also benefited from more transparency and the creativity that a free society encourages. In the 21st century, South Korea has firmly established itself as a prosperous, technologically advanced democracy. It boasts a population of about 52 million, the majority living in dynamic urban centers like Seoul, a megacity of 10 million itself. The country's journey from poverty to affluence is often cited as a development success story. As of 2023, South Korea's per capita income and Human Development Index rank it among the world's high-income, developed nations. It is a member of the G20 and OECD, and its corporations are global leaders in semiconductors, smartphones, automobiles, and shipbuilding. The standard of living has risen immensely. Cities are modern with cutting-edge infrastructure, education levels are among the highest in the world, and life expectancy, over 83 years, is now one of the top 5 globally. South Korea was even the first former aid recipient country to become a foreign aid donor, joining the OECD's Development Assistance Committee in 2010, reflecting how far it has come. One notable feature of South Korea is its social homogeneity coupled with rapid globalization. The nation remains one of the most ethnically homogeneous in the world. Around 96% of the population are ethnic Koreans, a result of a long history without large-scale immigration. There's a growing community of foreign workers and immigrants in recent years, but still under 5% of the population. This homogeneity underpins a strong national cultural identity and social cohesion, but has also presented challenges as Korea adapts to multiculturalism. Religion in South Korea is diverse. Today, a slight majority of South Koreans are not affiliated with any religion, while the rest are mostly split between Christianity, about 20% Protestant and 10% Catholic, and Buddhism, 17%. This is a dramatic change from a century ago when Christianity was virtually non-existent. It grew rapidly from the mid-20th century. Buddhism, present in Korea for almost 1,700 years, continues to thrive, and Confucian values still influence societal attitudes, even if not practiced as a formal religion. Freedom of religion is guaranteed, and megachurches in Seoul are among the world's largest, while Buddhist temples dot urban and rural landscapes alike. Culturally, South Korea has undergone a renaissance and become a global trendsetter. The term Korean Wave, Hallyu, was coined to describe the surge of worldwide popularity of Korean entertainment and culture since the late 1990s. This phenomenon began with Korean TV dramas gaining huge followings across Asia, early hits like Winter Sonata in 2002, and expanded dramatically with K-pop music conquering global charts in the 2010s. South Korea consciously invested in its cultural industries as a form of soft power. Even a former president remarked on making Korea a top exporter of popular culture. The results are evident. K-pop idols sell out stadiums from Los Angeles to Paris, and groups like BTS and Blackpink have topped Billboard charts and broken YouTube records. Alongside music, Korean films and television have earned critical and commercial success internationally. For example, the film Parasite won the Academy Award for Best Picture in 2020. Korean television series on Netflix and other platforms enjoy massive global viewership, and the country's video games, webtoons, and other digital content have broad reach. This global embrace of Korean culture extends to cuisine and lifestyle as well. Korean food, once little known outside the peninsula, is now hugely popular worldwide. You can find kimchi, bulgogi barbecue, and bibimbap in cities across the globe. The traditional process of kimjang, community kimchi making, is even listed by UNESCO as an intangible cultural heritage of humanity, underscoring how food is a proud aspect of Korean cultural identity. South Korea's domestic pop culture also drives interest in Korean fashion and beauty products, the K-beauty craze, as well as tourism. Many fans travel to Korea to experience the locales from their favorite dramas or K-pop videos. These developments have significantly boosted South Korea's soft power and national brand. By the mid-2010s, Hallyu is estimated to contribute billions of dollars to the Korean economy. Despite its modernity, South Korea continues to balance tradition and innovation. Time-honored customs like Chuseok, Harvest Festival, and Lunar New Year are widely celebrated, and ancestral memorial rites are still practiced by many families. Traditional arts, such as panzori, epic folk singing, and taekwondo, Korean martial art, are promoted and preserved. At the same time, the country is one of the most tech-savvy in the world, boasting some of the fastest internet speeds, a high smartphone penetration, and dreams of leading in fields like AI, robotics, and biotech. South Korea's society faces contemporary challenges too. Economic inequality, a rapidly aging population due to very low birth rates, intense academic pressure on youth, and the ever-present security threat from North Korea. Politics remains lively, with a well-informed electorate and a free press that spares no one from scrutiny. In summary, the story of South Korea is one of remarkable resilience and transformation. From ancient kingdoms forged in myth, through eras of glory and struggle, to colonization and national division, the Korean people have endured and built anew. In just a few decades after war and poverty, South Korea reinvented itself as a flourishing democracy with a leading economy and a rich cultural footprint on the world stage. It is a nation where ultra-modern skyscrapers tower over historic palaces, where the latest K-pop hit might incorporate a traditional folk melody, a place where past and present blend. The history of South Korea, from start to present, is a testament to a nation that has continually evolved while holding onto a proud sense of identity forged over millennia.